The dinner table fell silent the moment Evelyn stood up. My husband Liam froze mid-bite, his fork hovering above his plate like he was afraid to move. I could feel the eyes of 12 dinner guests shifting between us, waiting to see what would happen next. Evelyn was wearing that expression I'd come to know well, the one that meant she was about to say something cruel disguised as concern. "You'll never truly be worthy of my son," she announced, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "You married up, Isla. You should remember that every single day." The room seemed to hold its breath. I looked at Liam, searching his face for some sign that he would defend me, that he would stand up and tell his mother that what she'd said was wrong. He looked down at his plate instead. My cheeks burned with humiliation as I watched her smirk, clearly satisfied with herself. She leaned forward slightly like she wasn't finished yet. "This house you're living in? I paid for it. You should remember whose roof you're under." Something inside me shifted in that moment. Not anger exactly, but something colder. Something clearer. I set down my wine glass carefully, took a breath, and spoke in a voice so quiet everyone had to lean in to hear it. "You really shouldn't have said that," I said. Then I excused myself from the table and left the room. My name is Isla Vaughn, and that night my marriage cracked open like an egg. Not in a dramatic way. There was no explosion, no shouting match after everyone left. It was worse than that. It was the slow, steady realization that the man I'd married had chosen peace over protecting me. I grew up in a modest neighborhood on the other side of town. My parents worked hard, taught me to work harder, and somehow I became an architect. I loved designing buildings, loved the way a good structure could transform a space into something beautiful and functional. I was good at my job. I was making a real name for myself at my firm when I met Liam at a friend's party. He was charming in that effortless way that rich people sometimes are. He made me laugh. He listened when I talked about my projects. He looked at me like I was interesting, like my background didn't matter. When he told me he came from money, I didn't think it would matter. I was wrong. The first time I met his mother, Evelyn Vaughn, she smiled at me the way a jeweler might examine a cubic zirconia someone was trying to pass off as a diamond. "Pretty girls like you always want something," she'd said, tilting her head. "I hope you'll take care with my son's heart." I thought she was joking. I wasn't sure when I realized she wasn't. The engagement party happened 3 months after Liam proposed. I was happy, genuinely happy, excited about building a life with someone I loved. Evelyn stood in her living room, surrounded by her wealthy friends, and made a joke about my engagement ring. "It's quite modest," she said, picking up my hand and examining it like she was evaluating livestock. "For a Vaughn bride, I mean. Usually the stone is at least 2 carats. My parents were standing right there. I watched my mother's face crumple slightly, and watched my father's jaw tighten. Later, Liam apologized in the way he always did when his mother said something painful. "That's just how Mom shows love," he'd explained, like that made it acceptable. "She teases everyone." But she didn't tease everyone. She teased me. She teased people she thought were less than people she wanted to keep in their place. I should have seen it then as a warning sign. I should have recognized that marrying Liam meant accepting that his mother would always be a presence in our marriage, always a source of tension, always a person who would measure me and find me wanting. But I was in love. I convinced myself that once we were married, once we had our own space, things would change. I was wrong again. The house gift happened at our wedding reception. Evelyn made an announcement just as everyone was finishing their main course, tapping her champagne glass with a fork until the room quieted down. "I have a gift for you too," she said, beaming like she was about to announce she was giving us the world. "I've purchased a beautiful home for you. Consider it my wedding gift. A fresh start for my son and his new wife." Everyone applauded. Liam looked shocked and grateful. I looked relieved. We'd been worried about affording a down payment, about the stress of finding the right place. This seemed generous. This seemed like the beginning of Evelyn accepting me into the family. It seemed like maybe things would be okay after all. What I didn't know was that the house came with conditions. Invisible strings attached. Control mechanisms wrapped up in gift paper and ribbon. What I didn't know was that nothing Evelyn did was ever truly generous. Everything was a transaction. Everything was leveraged. The house was beautiful. A 3-bedroom colonial with a wraparound porch and hardwood floors that gleamed. Liam loved it immediately. I loved it too, walking through the empty rooms and imagining what we could build there together. We moved in on a Saturday in June, and for exactly 1 week everything felt perfect. Then Evelyn started showing up unannounced. She'd let herself in with the spare key Liam had given her, arriving with criticism ready on her tongue. "The curtains are too plain," she'd say, or, "Shouldn't you have planted something in the front garden by now?" One afternoon she rearranged our living room furniture while I was at work. When I came home, I stood in the doorway of my own living room and couldn't even recognize it. She'd moved the sofa to a different wall, turned the reading chair around, and adjusted the artwork. "It has better flow this way," she'd explained when I called to ask her about it. I started keeping a journal after that. Just small notes. Observations. Times when Evelyn overstepped. Times when Liam defended her instead of me. I called it my survival guide, though I didn't like to think of my marriage as something I needed to survive. I jot down things like, "Evelyn showed up at 2 p.m. on Tuesday without calling. Rearranged the kitchen. Liam laughed when I was upset." Or she referred to me as the girl when talking to her friend on the phone. I was standing right there. The journal became my way of proving to myself that this wasn't normal. That these things were happening. That I wasn't being too sensitive or overreacting, as Liam sometimes suggested. It was documentation of a slow erosion of boundaries that I didn't know how to stop. The dinner party was Evelyn's idea, but it was held in our house. She invited her wealthy friends, women in designer clothes with salon-perfect hair, who looked at me with barely concealed curiosity. I'd spent the entire day cooking, preparing appetizers and a main course that I hoped would impress them. As people arrived, Evelyn led them through the house like she was giving a tour of her own home. "And this is Liam's project," she said when she introduced me to her friends, gesturing at me like I was a piece of art she'd commissioned. I felt my face go hot, but I smiled. I swallowed my anger. I served people drinks and made small talk about things I didn't care about. That night, after everyone had left and Liam was asleep, I overheard Evelyn on the phone with her sister. She was in the hallway and I was in the bedroom, not quite asleep, and her voice traveled through the thin walls. "She's trying so hard, bless her heart," Evelyn was saying. "She probably thought tonight would impress us. She doesn't understand that you can't polish rust into gold. Liam's lucky she doesn't realize what she's after, or she might actually ask for more money." I lay there in the dark, listening to my mother-in-law insult me to her sister, and I realized something fundamental was broken. This wasn't miscommunication. This wasn't Evelyn not understanding that I came from humble beginnings. This was deliberate. This was mean. This was calculated. A few weeks later I was organizing our paperwork, bills, taxes, property documents, and I noticed something odd. The property tax payments were coming out of an account I didn't recognize. Not from Evelyn's account, like she'd claimed when she gave us the house. They were coming from an account associated with Liam's construction company. Confused, I started digging. I pulled out old documents from early in our marriage, files I hadn't looked at in years. And that's when I found it. A partnership agreement from when Liam's construction company was just starting out. Liam's company had been struggling in those first years. I'd helped him, loaned him money from my savings, helped him understand contracts, connected him with clients from my architectural firm who needed renovations. In exchange, I'd become a silent shareholder. The papers were right there, signed by both of us, witnessed and notarized. And buried in the legal language was the detail that changed everything. The property we were living in was partially owned by the company, which meant it was partially owned by me. My stomach flipped. The gift from Evelyn wasn't entirely hers to give. The house I'd been living under as a guest, reminded constantly that I should be grateful and humble, was partly mine. I'd helped build it, and I'd never even known. There was a family photo scheduled for a Saturday morning. One of those professional photography sessions where everyone shows up dressed in matching colors and poses in front of a backdrop. Evelyn had organized it without consulting me about what I'd be wearing. When I arrived at the photographer's studio, she was already there, handing a list to the photographer, specific poses she wanted, specific groupings. I scanned the paper, looking for myself, looking for any indication that I should be in at least one of the family portraits. I found my name at the bottom of a second list. "We'll get photos with her separately," Evelyn said, patting my arm like I was a child. "Family photos first, then we'll work you in." They never worked me in. I waited in the studio for 3 hours while they took photo after photo, Evelyn and Liam, Evelyn and her siblings, Evelyn and her grandchildren, Evelyn with various combinations of relatives. But never with me. Never as part of the family unit. When I finally left, I sat in my car in the parking lot and cried. Not big dramatic sobs, just quiet tears of frustration and hurt. I wasn't even angry at that point. I was just sad. Sad that my husband's family had decided I was temporary. Sad that Liam hadn't asked why I wasn't in the photos. Sad that I'd tried so hard for so long and it still wasn't enough. That night I dried my eyes and made a decision. I wouldn't let her erase me. Not anymore. At a family brunch the following week, I overheard two of Liam's aunts gossiping. They were standing near the kitchen, not bothering to keep their voices down. Apparently Isla's firm is failing, one of them said. That's why she's been so quiet lately. I heard she's living off Liam's money now. I felt something shift inside me. Evelyn had been spreading lies about me, about my business, about my financial situation. She'd been poisoning the well, making sure that everyone in the family saw me as a burden. A gold digger who trapped their precious Liam. I could have confronted them. I could have made a scene. Instead, I smiled and walked over to their group. Funny you should mention that, I said, voice light and pleasant. My firm just landed a government contract, actually. Largest project we've ever done. We're expanding, bringing on new architects. It's really exciting. I watched Evelyn's face stiffen across the room where she was listening. I watched her excuse herself and leave the gathering early. My quiet revenge had begun. Not with anger or drama. Just with truth. I hired a lawyer named Ava. A friend of a friend who specialized in family law and business contracts. I brought her all the old documents, the partnership agreements, the property records. She reviewed everything carefully. Her expression growing more and more interesting. This is actually quite straightforward, she said finally. When you became a silent shareholder in Liam's company, the property, which was purchased through the company, became jointly held. Legally, you have a claim to a significant portion of this house. My hands shook as I listened to her explain the details. All this time, I'd been living as a guest in my own home. All this time, Evelyn had been acting like she was doing me some enormous favor. And all this time, I had actually owned part of the place. What do I want to do? I asked her. Ava leaned back in her chair. That's up to you. You could make a claim, force a sale, demand she buy out your share. Or you could hold on to this knowledge and use it as protection. Either way, you have options. You're not as trapped as you think you are. For 3 months I said nothing. I acted humble and small while quietly gathering every piece of documentation I might need. Every time Evelyn made a cutting remark about how lucky I was to live in her house, I smiled and said thank you. Every time she rearranged something in our home or criticized my cooking, I simply accepted it. On the surface, nothing had changed. But inside, everything had shifted. I was no longer waiting for Evelyn to accept me. I was no longer hoping that one day she'd decide I was good enough for her son. I was no longer letting her define my worth. My value wasn't something she could grant or take away. It was something I'd built myself, with my own 2 hands and my own brain and my own determination. She just didn't know it yet. At Liam's birthday dinner, Evelyn made a toast. She stood up, champagne glass in hand, and smiled at everyone gathered around the table. My son could have married anyone, she said, raising her glass higher. But he chose a dreamer. Someone with aspirations. The crowd laughed, not with me but at the implication. At the suggestion that my dreams were somehow less legitimate than the money Liam had inherited. I took a sip of my wine and caught Ava's eye across the table. She gave me the smallest nod. Then I spoke up, my voice calm and steady. And dreams build foundations, don't they? I said softly. No one quite understood what I meant. But Ava smiled into her glass. I smiled too, knowing that soon everyone would understand exactly what I meant. The breaking point came at a family dinner when Evelyn made a comment about my late father. She was talking to someone about backgrounds and family history when she said, Isla's father was in construction, I believe. Very noble work, though not exactly prestigious. It was small, dismissive, designed to put my family in a box labeled, less than. But I'd reached my limit. I stood up, voice shaking slightly. My father raised a daughter who built her own success, I said. You've mistaken my kindness for weakness, Evelyn. That ends now. I left the dinner. Liam followed me to the car, apologizing, trying to smooth things over. But I told him I needed time. I needed space to figure out what I actually wanted. That night, I called Ava and told her to begin the process. It was time to claim what was legally and rightfully mine. Liam came to me the next day, confused and hurt. "Why are you doing this?" he asked. "Why are you turning against your own family? My mother is upset. She thinks you're being vindictive." I looked at him, really looked at him, and I realized I was seeing him clearly for the first time in years. This was a man who valued peace more than justice. A man who would rather I stay quiet and hurt than rock the boat with his mother. A man who hadn't defended me when his own mother called me unworthy. "I'm not turning against anyone," I said quietly. "I'm finally turning toward myself. That's something different." He didn't understand. He probably still doesn't. Ava and I met at a coffee shop downtown. She'd been doing some research into Evelyn's business and her face showed concern. "Her company is in serious financial trouble," she told me, sliding a folder across the table. "Significant debt. Overdue loans, creditors circling. She's been playing rich with borrowed money. The house she's so proud of? The one she's been holding over your head as proof of her superiority? It's at risk." I sat back, absorbing this information. Evelyn's entire identity, her superiority, her condescension, her way of making me feel small, was built on a house of cards that was about to collapse. But I didn't feel satisfied by this news. I felt sad. I felt tired. I realized that what I actually wanted wasn't to watch Evelyn fall. What I wanted was my life back. What I wanted was to be free. Evelyn showed up at my door on a Tuesday afternoon, panic clear on her face. She asked to speak to me alone, and we sat in the living room of the house that was partially mine, partially hers, wholly confusing in its ownership. "I need help," she said, her voice small in a way I'd never heard before. "My business is struggling. I need to raise capital quickly. I was wondering if you and Liam might consider a loan. Just temporary." I could have said yes. I could have helped her, made this entire situation go away, saved her from the consequences of her own financial mismanagement. But that would have meant going back to the way things were. It would have meant accepting her treatment of me as the price of family peace. "I'm not in a position to help," I said gently. "But I think you should talk to a financial advisor about your options. There are people who specialize in helping business owners in your situation." She left confused, probably expecting me to be thrilled by her admission of need, thrilled to be useful to her for once. But I wasn't. I was just moving forward. Liam found the property documents on my desk. I wasn't hiding them, I'd stopped hiding things by then. He read through them, his expression shifting from confusion to shock to something that looked like betrayal. "You own part of our house?" he demanded. "You went behind my back?" I'd expected anger. I'd prepared for accusations. But what I heard underneath was wounded pride. He was upset that I had power. He was upset that I'd had this resource all along and hadn't told him. "I didn't go behind your back," I said calmly. "These documents have been there for years. You signed them." "I signed them. We both made a choice at that moment to support your business. The house was purchased through the company. I'm simply acknowledging the legal reality of that transaction." He couldn't argue with logic. He could only leave the room. The family meeting happened on a gray Saturday morning in Evelyn's office. She'd called it to discuss restructuring and family finances and practical next steps. Liam sat beside me, still not quite forgiving me for my betrayal of family peace. His cousin was there, his Aunt Evelyn herself. She looked drawn, older than I remembered. She looked like someone who'd finally realized that her money couldn't protect her from consequences forever. Evelyn presented a proposal to sell the house. The market was good, she explained. The proceeds could help with her business situation. Everyone looked at me, waiting to see if I'd object, if I'd cause a scene. Instead, I waited until she finished. Then I slid the ownership documents across the table. "You can't sell what isn't entirely yours," I said quietly. The room went silent. People started reading the papers, realizing what they said, and understanding the legal situation. Evelyn's face was drained of color. Evelyn fainted. Not dramatically, not to manipulate. She actually lost consciousness, overwhelmed by the reality of her situation. Someone called an ambulance. While we waited, I sat in the chair I'd been sitting in and drank the water someone had poured for me. I wasn't heartless. I wasn't cruel. I was just done. I had just finished accepting that my value was something she could measure and find wanting. I was just ready to live my own life. When the paramedics arrived, I went to the hospital with them, but I didn't follow her into the emergency room. I sat in the waiting area and called Ava. "It's done," I said. "Now what?" The family fractured after that. Evelyn's siblings, who'd always looked down on me, started questioning her behavior and the financial situation she'd created. Liam spent weeks in a fog of confusion and embarrassment. His perfect family image, the wealthy Vaughns with their inherited money and superior breeding, had been revealed as fragile, built on debt and pride and the kind of love that keeps score. I moved out of the house. Not because I had to, because I needed to. I found an apartment across town in a neighborhood that reminded me of where I'd grown up. It was smaller, simpler, but it was mine. "I built this house for love," I told Liam when I left. "I'm leaving it for peace." He didn't try to stop me. News travels fast in small circles. Within weeks, the story had become legendary in Evelyn's social group. The woman who'd insulted her daughter-in-law only to discover she was living under a roof that wasn't entirely hers to claim. People started looking at Evelyn differently at charity events. The phone invitations stopped coming. The lunch dates were canceled or postponed indefinitely. And something unexpected happened. My firm started getting new clients. People who'd heard about what I'd done, about how I'd handled an impossible situation with grace and quiet dignity. They wanted to work with someone who had that kind of strength. My business grew. Liam came to my apartment on a Wednesday evening, flowers in hand, an apology on his face. "I should have defended you," he said. "I should have stood up to my mother from the beginning. I was a coward." I let him say what he needed to say. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger takes energy, and I was learning to save my energy for things that mattered. "You let her define us," I said finally. "You let her set the rules and you accepted them. I just redefined myself. That's the difference." We didn't get back together. Some fractures are too deep to repair. But we did reach a place of peace, an understanding. He was sorry. I believed him. But belief wasn't the same as going backward. Evelyn lost her company. The debt finally caught up with her. The creditors finally stopped waiting. She was forced to sell her estate, the place where she'd hosted so many dinners and made so many people feel small. She moved into a small apartment in a modest neighborhood, the same kind of neighborhood where I'd grown up, the same kind of place she'd mocked me for coming from. I didn't feel victorious when I heard the news. I felt sad for her. Sad that she'd spent so much energy trying to be superior to everyone around her that she'd never bothered to build anything real. I used my share of the house sale to start something new. I opened my own architectural firm with 2 colleagues I trusted. We designed sustainable buildings for people who actually needed beautiful spaces, not just rich people who wanted to show off their wealth. We designed community centers and affordable housing and schools. We built things that mattered. I named the firm Root and Rise, a nod to the foundation you build your life on and the growth that comes after. Clients lined up. We won awards. I rebuilt my life on my own terms with my own vision, with nobody's approval but my own. A year later, I drove past the old house. Strangers lived there now. I could see their life through the windows. Family photos on the walls, children playing in the yard, laughter visible even from the street. I thought about all the time I'd spent trying to be worthy of living in that house, trying to prove myself to Evelyn, trying to earn a place at a table that was never meant for me. Then I thought about the apartment I'd chosen, the business I'd built, the life I'd created. They said I wasn't worthy of their world, I said to myself, so I built my own. And it was so much better. I smiled and drove away toward the rest of my life.